Brian David Gilbert, safety fan and bureaucratic wunderkind, the man of a million talents that basically presses randomized character on his head every few months. This man that gives off a different energy in every video he makes, ranging from onto the midlife crisis to really creepy businessman stuck in an endless loop of being associated with his ice cream sandwiches, makes some of the smartest and most interesting videos I've seen anybody on this platform make. This man has a creative writing degree and it shows. Now, why do I make such a bold claim, and who am I even to make that claim? Well, the answer to that second question is literally nobody, but for the first one, that's a little bit of a longer answer. Hi, I'm WhaleMilk, and I'm here to break down the subtle characterizations of a random video producer on the internet. Before we actually get into it, I'm going to break down how I'm going to go about, breaking down Brian's videos in what I like to call the BDG verse. To start, I'm mostly going to go video by video, picking out major details and just summarizing what happens in his channel. There are a lot of minute details I'd like to point out that actually create a really subtle character in a lot of these videos. And once I get to BDG's later projects, that's going to become very obvious. Most of his early videos are just short, small bits with a short joke to it. The constant dread of existentialism doesn't show up for a while. The first video that this shows up in is Ice Bucket Challenge 2016, but that's still just a short 30-second video that only has a single joke to it. There honestly isn't much to say about his early videos aside from a few interesting details I picked out. For one, Watermelon Man. In a bit, I'll be talking about this video got me a job, but this video is just the first cry for help, if you will, for Brian to find a job. Another detail is the general mood of complete and utter apathy. The emotionless expression and mood in his voice in videos like An American Explains the Current State of the UK Politics and Siblings is utterly painful and expresses no emotion.
Yo, hello, hi and hey. It's time to talk about the UK.
The mood contrasts with videos such as A Quick Guide to the Edinburgh Fringe and Walking on the West Highland Way, where the music is upbeat and joyful, but still has a negative mood to the lyrics, such as criticisms towards Edinburgh when the Fringe is in town, or the self-criticism of just looking like a dad.
Hey, look how I look like a dad.
The interesting development of BDG's character starts, in my eyes, with the video Siblings. I'm going to go video by video from here on out, picking out major details that are pertinent in later videos. Siblings has one major introduction, Laura, Brian's sister. It doesn't play much of a role in the BDG verse, but does make a few appearances that I will be sure to point out. Siblings is also sure to make clear that there's some strange connection to eldritch and cosmic horrors that come up here and again.
Void of space is a vast expanse.
This one's for the Swedes isn't a major video either, but it does introduce a style of video Brian is sure to recreate later in his career. The stupid music videos that he lip syncs to a song he made that shows off his theater experience. This style of video progresses to extreme levels in videos like Building Your Online Brand or The Entirety of Dances Moving, which I'll get into a little bit, don't worry. My autobiography gives easily the most important lore detail that we've ever received. BDG is afraid of horses. Also, BDG sold a soul, which might explain the soul's look behind his eyes. This also connects back to Siblings and is a further glimpse into Brian's connections to the dark arts. Hey Sarah, what's your favorite thing about the Austin Film Festival? Gives another quite important bit of information. Brian really likes joints. Rejected Old Day jingle is nothing special, it's really stupid. When I Make a Good Pun gives us a peek into the caricature that BDG puts on. The caricature that absolutely hates life and that got a corporate job downtown and makes videos just for fun. We'll see this more in one of my favorite videos coming up. I would have skipped why I haven't made a video in a while if it weren't for a comment from Zane that said, I like that this implies Brian is beyond human. He says this because Brian puts the video in a folder called Too Good for Human Eyes. Could this be because of what happened when he sold his soul? Did that make him something beyond human or something but human? Also, who is this wallpaper of? I would love to know who this guy is. I thought it was Philip May from this video, but it definitely isn't.
Give up on your dreams of becoming a baker. You gotta give up on your dreams.
It's one of my favorite pre-dances moving video, and is going to be the last video I cover in this part. A few things in this video. One, I'd like to point out that Brian's roommate in this video is Nicholas, the first scientist that shows up in Scientifically Calculating the Game of the Year, which is extremely ironic because Nicholas is actually working towards his PhD at MIT. Related to BDG, a few things stand out. For one, him mentioning wanting to write ties into his Hopkins degree. Speaking of which, actually, what is it specifically? I got it. Brian studied writing seminars and cognitive science. Writing seminars are classes that, quote, help students combine imaginative writing and scholarship in general context of the humanities. The cognitive science part of the diploma is a little bit more complicated, but this is what I've been able to grasp. Cognitive science at Hopkins is about knowing how the brain takes in information, processes it, and then perceives it. There are 5 focuses in the course when going for a bachelor's: cognitive psychology / neuropsychology, linguistics, computational approaches to cognition, neuroscience, and philosophy of mind. The course requires a student to pick 2 as their main focus. Using the other parts of his diploma, we can use the fact that he studied writing as a context for what focal areas he may have chosen. I'm assuming he chose linguistics and philosophy of mind. With that assumption, that could be totally wrong, we can apply our knowledge of what he studied to his videos, which will be important for the next batch of videos. This short series of videos is an absolute beast and has details that could cover its own video. But I have to get through this part so I can actually tackle the entirety of Unraveled, so I'll cover the basics and point out a few details as we go. Dance is Moving, for those who haven't seen it, which is a lot of you, is a show about what I assume to be Brian's struggle with moving to Brooklyn, presented in the form of a happy-go-lucky dance class. Dance is Moving, even from the first episode, portrays dance as a metaphor for life of sorts, which comes up time and time again.
Hey, cause there's a reason you're feeling kinda insecure in your life, bro. Maybe it's a job that's the root of all your discontented strife, no.
One detail I really like regarding Dance is Moving is in episode 1, when he says finding your beat or finding your wife. He gestures towards the person on his left, presumably Megan, who asks later out on a date in episode 2.
Or finding your wife.
Episode 2 brings some interesting things. The move that Brian teaches is a move that is extremely energetic and extremely happy. The song in the background is also extremely energetic and fast and moving and conveys the energy that Brian feels after successfully asking Megan out on a date. One detail here is that the robot voice could represent Brian's underscoring depression and self-doubt, saying negative things like, I can't believe you got a date. But yet again, I could also just be overthinking it. Episode 3 is The Crab. This is the turning point of the series, where Brian realizes that he has to move. The denial of that notion and lingering about how much he loves Baltimore to try and forget that he doesn't really feel welcome there anymore. He also realizes that all the friends he's made there are unique to Baltimore and aren't going to be around if he moves. It's also seemingly a problem of identity. He loves Balti, and if he leaves, he feels like he might lose his exoskeleton groove.
I gotta follow my dreams. Is it time to move? If I go, will I keep my exoskeleton groove?
Wiggle Arms is where things really start going downhill. At this point, there are only 3 episodes left. Wiggle Arms is a way of saying goodbye to everyone before he really has to go. And that's hard on people. Megan even leaves at the end of episode 4 and doesn't even come back. Episode 5 is where things get really hard to watch. Everybody has a partner to dance with except Brian. This is where life really gets bumpy for Brian, symbolized by the fact that the music is now in 3, where Brian had been dancing in 4 up to that point. He loses his date, he falls out, wishes he could dance with her one last time, but he can't. Everybody else is happy and he's not. He's having second thoughts, but he has to go through with the move anyways. Episode 6 is easily the hardest episode to watch in my opinion. I've seen this video all of twice. It's so hard to watch this episode. It's the epitome of depression, struggling to get out of bed in the morning, struggling to move. It's backed up by the shot of Brian in his bed with tears in his eyes. I honestly don't like watching this episode. It's not that it's bad, it's wonderful. It's just that it's hard to sit through, and watching everybody just give up on Brian, even Declan, is just so painful. That feeling of rejection that just bleeds through the screen makes me so uncomfortable, and that's why this video honestly is amazing. Finally, episode 7, Freestyle. My favorite video Brian has ever made. This video backs up and solidifies the claim that I made at the beginning of the section. Dance is Moving, even from the first episode, portrays dance as a metaphor for life of sorts. The little rap that Brian gives at the beginning of this episode supports this. He draws a very clear parallel between life and dance. Most of the meaning of this episode can be gleaned from the song that plays itself. After a near 40 seconds of silence and solemn contemplation, Brian starts playing See the Day, which is a song that switches between 4/4 and 3/4 time signature. This is a form of acceptance in my eyes. This is where Brian accepts that his life is going to get hard. It's going to change, become uncomfortable, and he's going to have to dance in 3. So he accepts it by mixing it with the only other way he's had to dance before. It's even more fitting that it's a song that Brian composed. The lyrics of the song are something that I'm going to break down line by line and tie into the dancing that he's doing.
The sun is rising up half the way. I never thought I'd see the day. The moon is crumbling, but that's okay. I never thought I'd see the day.
An interesting way to start off the song. The song has an interesting format. Each stanza trades off a line that repeats every other line. The first one is, I never thought I'd see the day. And the second is, I can't quite tell what I'm hoping for. It's an interesting pattern that relates to the series. Brian's saying that he'd never see the day some of these things would happen to him, like him moving from Baltimore and having to abandon his friends. The sun rising up half the way and the moon crumbling is an interesting bit of imagery. The two scenes are night and day to each other, literally, and they are very surreal images. The sun is rising half the way, to me, means one of two things. It could mean that the sun is halfway above the horizon and maybe stuck there and won't rise any further, or that it's noon and the sun won't set, or the sun is somewhere in between, halfway between dawn and noon. It's kind of unclear, and the symbolism of the statement to me is especially unclear. The moon crumbling is a bit clearer as to what it's trying to convey, and I feel like it would help to understand what the sun rising half the way is trying to communicate, but I haven't been able to pin it. The moon crumbling to me is a clear symbol for Brian's life slowly falling apart. The happiness he built in Baltimore is falling away. Megan and him broke up, he's losing friends, and even Declan left him alone, in the dust, alone on a train to Brooklyn. But it's okay, he can't really do much about it. His life will be fine in Brooklyn. He made friends like this in Balti, why can't he do it again?
The sea is bubbling beyond the shore. I can't quite tell what I'm hoping for.
I have no clue about this one.
Dive out in nothing and into more, but I can't quite tell what I'm hoping for.
This line, talking about driving out of nothing and into more, relates to why he's moving from Baltimore in the first place. Brian was looking for video work in Baltimore, but he couldn't find anything. He was in a state of nothingness, being unemployed and not having anything to do with his life. But he took a leap of faith into more, into a life with so many more possibilities, and it landed him in this situation. And he can't tell what he's hoping to happen.
Somehow, maybe now, I'll find the words to say. Never thought I'd see the day.
Again, this one's a bit ambiguous. The words to say about what? The best I can come up with is the words to talk about how he feels about in this situation, or words to speak when he's talking to Megan, maybe. I can't quite pin this line either.
Sleeping slip has begun to fray. I never thought I'd see the day. The pious hunter stopped stalking prey. I never thought I'd see the day.
These lines were what got me really thinking about this song when I first listened to it a year ago. For one, it taught me the word pious, and when I looked up the definition of pious, it really confused me at first. To be pious, or piety, is the act of being devoutly religious. What is a better definition to fit it is the archaic use of the word, to be dutiful or loyal, especially towards one's parents. The towards one's parents part isn't very helpful, but to be dutiful or loyal does. To be dutiful or loyal to hunting, to be devout in your purpose of being a hunter, and that thing stops hunting. This could easily be a metaphor for a variety of things. Brian's devotion towards his hometown, his devotion to his friends, something that does involve Brian, a whole bunch of things. The sleeping slip feels like it's talking about a certain clarity Brian reached at one point. A sleeping slip fraying is going to cause the wearer to stop wearing the slip because it's really uncomfortable. A more obscure connection, but this is the best one I could come up with.
Spent too much time writing all the lore. I can't quite tell what I'm hoping for.
I can't quite tell if this is Brian breaking the fourth wall, talking about writing the lore of the show, or even his character, and if it isn't, then I'm lost on this line too.
So I live my life being so unsure, 'cause I can't quite tell what I'm hoping for.
In the end, Brian is going to live his life. He's going in blind from this point out. No friends to guide him, to help him. And because he can't even tell what he's hoping for, he has no clear goal and nothing to look towards. So he's now unsure. And that's the end of Dances and Moving. Brian has left Baltimore. He has arrived in Brooklyn with a bag and a suit, and he's still desperate for a job. So as the script passes over 3,000 words, we move into... This part is going to briefly cover the 9 videos that Brian has released on his main channel since the end of Dances and Moving, but before quarantine hit. Let's start off with Stranger Things, the most stupid thing I think this man has ever made. It's hilarious though, and it has a small detail somebody in the comments pointed out. From the Poke Rap Unraveled.
It's what we in the industry call educational rap flow, and that's defined as a rap wherein you could include an anti-drug line and it wouldn't sound out of place.
From Stranger Things.
Top of my class, magna cum laude, but that doesn't mean I can't get a little rowdy. Can I get a heck yeah?
Heck yeah!
A note to crystal meth.
Besides that small detail, there's nothing of use. I'm gonna skip over it's November 8th because that's literally just a short joke and move into this video got me a job. He finally got a job. He sent in a wonderful cover letter and probably blew the mind of the person that had to watch all the cover letters. The biggest detail is that we can safely assume that Brian going for a job was a ploy to pitch his Waluigi game to Nintendo in a more professional environment. Okay, that's a bit far-fetched, but it is interesting how he mentions Waluigi twice over in the video, putting emphasis on the fact that he really likes Waluigi. And that obsession builds and builds, with subtle details slipped in throughout the entirety of the Unraveled, which I'll get into later. By My Bed, 19 Ways You Can Say Haha What, Shingle Jingle, and Alone in My Apartment don't really have much to talk about, aside from the fact that, as always, they're really good videos. New Shoes doesn't really have much to talk about, aside from the fact that it's the last video that features Brian's first Brooklyn apartment. It's also the first and so far the only appearance of Pat in his channel. Again, nothing interesting. The days of spring will surely bring the birds and bees cavorting, but since I am a gentleman, I'd much rather be jorting. Yes, it's how to make jorts in the return of the haunted BDG with the endless pit of dark pain behind his eyes. We also see the first Waluigi hint, Brian growing his crooked mustache a little bit. This is the first time we've seen Brian with a mustache, and surely won't be the last. At this point, it's extremely patchy, but by May, it will be full and still really, really awful. The really shitty mustache really fits the atmosphere of the video, though, because in this video, Brian plays the archetype of the extremely awkward person that calls themselves an enthusiast of an extremely obscure thing that would love to break into a monologue about said thing, but in reality, they are probably the only person in the country to give more than 2 shits about their hobby. The appearance of Brian, as well as how he changes his voice into an almost posh sort of timbre, creates a super interesting, creepy atmosphere that unsettles you from the start. Unsettles you when he first hints at what can happen to you if you spill blood on the jeans, and finally resolves by the end of the video. The climax of the video actually builds up with subtle hints that I never noticed until writing the script. When Brian bleeds on the jeans, he layers footage with a warning to not bleed on the jeans. When we reach step 1B, reminisce, we see the shot of Brian frolicking on the beach with his jeans. They seemingly stop Brian in place, and Brian becomes extremely confused. However, he continues the process. The rest of the rising action is pretty self-explanatory. Also, what's up with this painting moving in basically every scene we see in the apartment? And that is the last video I'd like to cover before we enter the big boy. 7 pages in, holy shit. God, this is such a long script. Unraveled is Brian's baby, Brian's biggest project, and if I'm going to be honest, one of the best things on Polygon. It's a wonderfully complex yet easy to get into show that is legendary in its meme potential. I mean, just look at the raw amount of BDG out of context there are. So the biggest thing that I should point out right away is that the title of the show acts as sort of double entendre, where the term unraveled describes the unraveling of sometimes obfuscated and dense lore, and sometimes of completely meaningless and frivolous tasks, like who is the hottest Castlevania monster. But it also serves as a way to describe the main gimmick of the show, the unraveling of BDG's fragile conscience. This unraveling takes a few forms, some very, very obvious, some a little more subtle. The 2 examples that construct each other The most is the difference between the end of I read all 337 books in Skyrim so you don't have to, and the end of the following episode, ranking all 200 plus Mega Man robots. Both share the title of Unraveled, but BDG only completely unravels and has a breakout of sorts in the Skyrim video. So then why does a title like the Mega Man episode deserve to carry the title of Unraveled? Because this video proves a point that unraveling isn't solely reserved for having an angry fit in the video. The unraveling here is hard to notice because it's done in a much more natural and human way. It's done in a way that even gets Pat involved. It's the laughing. It's the slap happiness of the entire crew. It's the mention that they've been recording for so long. You can tell that Brian gets progressively more exhausted the further he gets into the video. His jokes progressively become more forced and become more exhausted in their delivery, especially during and after the construction robots. There are also the jokes like the one regarding Garbage Man that are inherently self-deprecating and also good to point out. So with this, I'm going to quickly go over each and every video and quickly describe how and why Brian, quote unquote, unravels in each one. He just starts to give up and basically becomes a mad scientist at the end. An interesting detail is he progressively undresses from his nice suit, and as he does, the lights become more and more red. Literally yells at you to not read all 337 books in Skyrim because a lot of them are really shitty. Also, less they are Guardian made. See the previous paragraph? Here's a little bit different. While there is unraveling regarding the bisexual disaster that BDG plays in the video, there is also an unraveling that happened, intentional or not, before the video was even in production. So much so that Brian was willing to annihilate himself in the sea. He had to read 684 pages of OSHA regulations. He's also making the video for Sakurai only, which shows that these videos create an interesting mindset of power in BDG's head, where he thinks these videos are of such importance that Sakurai will send him $50. Also interesting detail in the end of the video has an interesting mention of Kirby, which is an Unraveled video that came out later but took a very, very long time to complete.
Also, you could send me Kirby's phone number. I know he is real. Where are you hiding him?
A more subtle one, where Brian just gives up after discovering that the game of the year was Fortnite by a landslide. And also by the fact that he had to call his mom for like an hour and just list off video games. But he doesn't unravel in this one as much as he just gives up. Gives up on faith on his formula, which he spent so much time on, and just gives you an alternate formula. Then we get into religious crisis. I swear, I get whiplash when watching these two videos back to back. It's ridiculous. Understanding Kingdom Hearts is about going into a infamously convoluted franchise thinking, oh, this shouldn't be that hard, and then getting into it and then realizing, oh shit, this is more complicated than I thought ever possible, which is exactly what Brian does. Similar to the OSHA videos, but instead of reading nearly 700 pages of corporate legalese, he had to read the entirety of the Geneva Conventions to prove what MatPat had proved 6 years ago, that Mario is mentally unstable. But this time, the consequences are more inhumane. He's a war criminal. Jeez, that video came out 6 years ago? Holy shit. The Perfect Poker App is a more emotional one that takes place in a very interesting way. It takes place live. The unraveling is clear, the revelation of not being able to perform the poker app. But this breakdown is in part his own fault that is solved by the people he tried to shut out, the audience. Another subtle one that I actually had a hard time picking out. From what I can tell, this is a subtle cry for help regarding the shittiness of corporate structure and a personal recount partly of who Brian has had as a boss. It might also be like a criticism of just authority in general. Then we have a more example of why Brian is the definition of bisexual disaster. 2 words, this shirt. Their eventual disheartening towards eating so much goddamn food, and the fact that it ends on such a monstrosity of a dish just proves the point so well. The frustration towards Zuko and the general feeling of hatred towards that goddamn cat. He accidentally reinvented ska. How do you not go insane over that? I'm going to include finding your Kojima name just because I can. Here we get a glimpse into Brian's extremely chaotic past, and the name Lewd Improvisation Man is fucking fantastic. Falls into a similar chap to the whole Kingdom Hearts thing, where he starts as an outsider to a series thinking, oh, this will be easy task I can use an existing thing to help me with, but then just goes down the drain. This is just him having a midlife crisis. I can't tell if this is supposed to be a genuine breakdown, or if the end is supposed to retcon the breakdown as acting, or if it's supposed to be both. This one, in fact, is a genuine breakdown. Midlife crisis part 2, financial crisis. Quarantine video number 1, Brian realizes that he's getting older but refuses to accept that reality, so he tries to fix his fatigue with ridiculous remedies. And 24, the most recent Unraveled as of recording this, Brian gets money. The pure variety that these videos have in how Brian goes insane each and every time goes to show how creative Brian is in making a show that seemingly is pretty shallow in its premise, or could just become a boring series of videos that just kind of cover frivolous topics. For these videos to never feel repetitive, even though he's been making these for 2 years at this point, is impressive. Now, why do I talk about the entirety of his individual work just to talk about Unraveled? Well, for one, this video is called BDG Unraveled, but also there are some interesting bits here and there that connect the previous established facts and truth of the BDG verse. Remember when I said that Brian's greatest fear is that of horses? Well,
Pharaoh is another warlord jerk, but he's mostly disqualified because the bottom half of him is a horse, and horses are terrifying.
this is proof that there is clear and unbridled connection between Brian's channel and the work that he does for Polygon. There's also connection between the characters. And whether this connection is the fact that the pain we experienced through his personal videos weakened his psyche so much so that Tara Long can just give him some money, a pen, and lock him in a studio and he just makes videos, or if it's just another desire that exists beyond what we have seen from him. Most of the Unraveled series is pretty normal, or as normal as a quirky series made by a super quirky dude can be, all the way until he accidentally makes ska and I fixed Fallout music by creating a totally new genre. From here, not including the Kojima name generator, starts the constant decline in themes of anxiety and existential dread. The only major breakdown that happens before this, that stand out to me at least, is the Sonic Bible, only because that's just a jab at religious extremism. The first video after the ska video is the Fire Emblem video, which at first glance doesn't have much going on in the video. However, the breakdown of the video is much more anxiety-induced and more helpless than the other breakdowns in the rest of the series at this point. The setup for the breakdown starts when Brian wasted an entire day trying to organize all the characters of Fire Emblem without realizing that the archetypes are already done for him on the Fire Emblem wiki, except that he still had to make categories because not all the characters have been organized for him. But then just how he plays the final scene where he combines all the categories eventually into one is done in a way that suggests very heavy anxious behavior. And the fact that the episode ends with Brian forgetting what the episode is even about, which is a first in the series. The next episode, the Sims episode, has a very prevalent theme of self-doubt, so much so that Brian tries to better himself by simulating himself in The Sims, which goes very poorly during the actual research process. The entire time during the research process in-game is filled with self-deprecating jokes and jokes about how, just like Sim Brian's life, real Brian's life is just as worthless. It's actually kind of depressing. But end of the video has a wonderful message about how friends can be wonderful and they put a sense of joy in Brian's life. And it's a wonderful parallel to Sim Brian's life, where Sim Brian had a life that was improved by the art he put in his apartment. Real Brian's life wasn't improved by the art itself, but by the process of getting that art. He was looking for the wrong thing. He wasn't looking for materialistic joy. And after that, we talk about Waluigi. This video isn't as much about anxiety and real personal matters like the Sims video was, but it still follows those themes, albeit in a much looser sense. The one thing I'd like to point out is that this isn't the first time we've heard a major reference to Waluigi in the BDG verse. The first time we heard a reference was back in This Video Got Me a Job, wherein Brian mentions Waluigi twice in this portion. This video is also a major video because it connects a whole bunch of stuff together from previous videos, mostly the copious amounts of jumping and kicking that Brian does, but also the mustache. I do not believe for 2 seconds that Brian randomly decided to grow an entire mustache and change his appearance just because he wanted to. One, it was really sudden. He said nothing about it until he just appeared in the Dark Souls video with a mustache and a new haircut. But also, I don't believe it was a genuine look because he went literally right back to his previous look. Long, luscious locks and clean-shaven face immediately after this video. But if this isn't the case, and the mustache wasn't as long of a con as I like to think it was, then I at least think that the Waluigi video was made specifically to get rid of the mustache. The thought process I have with this is that Brian didn't like his mustache, which is probably the case, telling by the amount of times he flames his mustache during this video and a whole bunch of others. And so he wrote the Waluigi video and the ending dramatic scene where he shaves his mustache just to get a good video out of it before he got rid of it. The fact that his love for kicking lines up so naturally and well makes me think that this was also planned from a ways out. And also how Waluigi was mentioned in a video made before he even got hired at Polygon just makes this video way too perfect. There is a matter of intent in this video, and because there is so much of this intent in other areas, I am not going to believe that the mustache was not a part of this con. But, intentional or not, The mustache is now gone, and we move into a new, extremely brief era of BDG videos that starts and ends in one video. When can Mario retire? Yes, I know I skipped a video. Hold your horses. This is probably the most real video out of the entirety of the series, talking about financial crisis. This video has very strong thematic ties to Give Up on Your Dreams Becoming a Baker, in which both works are extremely anxiety-filled views on how society is not good at supporting specific career paths, such as baking, or in Unraveled's case, video production. Also, I like to think that this video is taking shots at Polygon for not paying him enough to retire, which I know probably isn't the case because he's seemingly on good terms with his employer considering he's done videos with Terra, but it's just fun to hit canon. This one struck me considering how I personally haven't had to deal with real stretches of financial crisis yet, but I know what will happen. I just know. So you may have noticed I have skipped the video, and that's for good reason, because the Kirby video exists in a really strange time period that spans across 5 full Unraveled episodes. The recording took place between August 2nd and the release of the video, because Brian, intentionally or not, chose a topic that was possibly too much for him at the time. And even after the shave, it was truly too much, because the end of the video was him trying to become one with nature in the most exaggerated and extravagant breakdown we have yet seen from the man in this entire series. And yet, the video has one of my favorite endings in the entire show. The realization that not everything needs reading into. Not everything has a deeper meaning, and that shows a change in what Brian makes from then on. He has yet to cover an extremely obscure lore point since the Kirby video, and has since only made videos that are basically experiments to better himself. He's moved on. So this whole COVID thing hits, and then Brian goes silent because he can't go to the studio to record. He hasn't uploaded a video on his personal since Jorts, until he did. It's Time to Get Good at Darts is an interesting return to the old formula of extremely trippy and messed up cosmic horror weirdness that appears in videos like My Autobiography and Siblings, but this time covers the topic of getting really good at darts. Kind of self-explanatory. Next is Pepcorn, which is probably the most realistic look into Brian that we get, except that it still isn't a perfect look into his real person, as there is still a slight taste of theatrics you can catch here and there. Nothing very interesting about this one, so we're just going to move on to...
Hello, I'm Hugh Brandity.
Honestly, I love this video. It's so uncanny, but it's wonderful. This is Brian just flexing his skills, showing off that he can play a very elaborate character. This character is Hugh Brandity and is extremely unnerving. I can barely tell that Brian is behind the disguise because even Hugh's mannerisms are different. Speech patterns are different. The voice he puts on is so extra, but so much so that there isn't a single hint of Brian in there. It's so good. The one thing here I'm going to point out is the frustration Hugh shows for being constantly and painstakingly associated with ice cream sandwiches, which, knowing me in the entirety of this video, could just be me reading too much into this, but it just feels to me that this is Brian complaining about his brand basically being centered around jorts at this point, which, I mean, I don't blame him. Imagine being constantly associated with jorts. After those are made on his channel, Brian goes silent for a little bit longer and then comes out with 2 more Unraveled in relatively quick succession. One where he tries to fill himself with energy in the most ridiculous ways possible, and one where he gets paid. So this is an interesting video that has some very depressive themes about it. Although not expressly stated, I can see that there is an interesting theme on depression and the constant tiredness and fatigue that comes from chronic depression. If you're depressed and fatigued like that, a state of mind that's only accentuated by quarantine, then it only makes sense to look for something that might give you a bit of a pick-me-up. And here Brian does that, although he does it in a very exaggerated way, putting on a mask and relying on a scale that is entirely anecdotal and bound to be influenced by a placebo or 2 or 3 or 7. The placebos are probably intentional, but my point still stands. Finally, we reach the end of our journey with his latest video where he is sponsored by Riot Games to build the perfect gaming station to promote Valorant. The funny part I find about this is the fact that Brian comes into contact with a good amount of money and doesn't know what to do with it because of previously established financial incompetency. He also thinks that this impulsive spending will solve his problems in a game that is inherently skill-based. So there are a few things that build up to his eventual breakdown and realization at the end. The fact of this video is that Brian realizes that he isn't good at Valorant and just needs to play the game to get better. As he puts it, he was asking a toddler to pilot a helicopter, which honestly is a hilarious image to have. And then the actual most recent Unraveled is another long-term episode that he released while I was making this video, which took place over an entire year. A year where Brian only read Halo novels. This entire episode just reeks of loneliness and having nobody to talk to it about an incredibly niche thing, something that honestly I can relate with. It's hard being into super complicated things that have very small communities around them and having friends that don't care one bit about these insanely niche things. You just kind of have to do your own thing in your own head, be excited in your own head. To be fair, it's an extremely minor problem, but it can be painful sometimes, and that pain shows throughout this entire episode. The fact that Brian cannot help but go into a bunch of rants throughout the entire video just shows how much pent-up excitement he had built up through the entire year. And this is the only chance he gets to rant about these new things that he found himself to be excited about, especially the 2 trilogies. But in the end, he moves on and has a similar conclusion to the end of the Skyrim episode. That no, you don't have to read all of these to understand the lore. You don't even have to watch that video. All you need to know are the lore of the games and that the Master Chief's suit doesn't jack him off. And so that finishes Unraveled. And finishing Unraveled means that we have finally gone through and summarized and analyzed all of Brian's videos. From the videos on his personal channel all the way to all of his stuff on Polygon, we have created the full picture, and now we can start to understand. So far, going video by video and analyzing each video has taken 11 pages of script. And across these 11 pages, I have outlined and described a character, a terribly broken and anxiety-induced character. This character has 2 sides to him, one that in its own context and the other one in the context of the person who has created him, who I will be calling Brian Prime. The first explanation I can explain for certain. I know that when reading a work of art, trying to read that work in order to read who the creator is not something I or anybody really has liberty to do. What I am at liberty to discuss is what the work means in relation to itself. I can describe who Denna is and her character motivations when talking about the Kingkiller Chronicles, but I can't try and read past the book and try and find somebody in Rothfuss's life that inspired Denna. That being said, I could say for certain who the character BDG is. I could say that BDG is a anxiety-ridden bisexual disaster that constantly makes videos online to numb the pain. I can say that he gets a job at Polygon to help him feel at ease, but in an ironic twist cause him to be more anxious and mentally unstable than he's ever been. Either he becomes aggressive and irritable or he just breaks down entirely. But he keeps doing it, causing the next breakdown to be worse and worse until sometimes he just has a moment of clarity before descending back into madness. But what I will touch on is what BDG is to his creator, Brian Prime. The real Brian that has friends and coworkers at Polygon and sings in a band called The Altogether. Whether Brian really is an anxious being or whether he just says that to make his character more believable, I don't know. I'd like to say that he is, and the breakdowns that BDG show are just very exaggerated versions of what he experiences, but I can't say that he is because I have no right to say that, especially with a work that has such a blurry line between what is creator and what is real behavior. With that context as a whole, I think that Brian Prime has a few messages to say with his videos. His early videos don't have much to them, and those early videos kind of make the beginning of the script really memey. But when you reach Dances Moving and eventually move into Unraveled, there is some sort of message to take away. Brian makes sure to put emphasis on mental health in his work. In Unraveled, it's various amounts of emotional breakdowns, but in Dances Moving, it's much more subtle. The message there becomes the strongest in the last 2 episodes. Slowworm is the epitome of depression and what it's like to be stuck in a bed during the day. And understandably, BDG has just lost everything, his home, his friends, and now he's struggling to get out of bed. The last episode of the series shows the hopeful ending of a story like that, and maybe it's a reflection of what truly happened to Brian Prime. But that reading is, again, uncertain for somebody like me who doesn't know who Brian is in real life. Unraveled has the strongest connection to mental health, if not just a little bit hyperbolic. And more specifically, Unraveled has very, very strong connections to anxiety, either brought about from internal crises or from external ones, such as financial struggles. Most of the breakdowns past a certain point are entirely related to some sort of anxiety. But that kind of reading is only valid to a point, right? These videos are for comedy, not for any further artistic purpose. Aside from Dances Moving, there's something around these videos that attach a little card to what I've said, and that card has a short little question. Who cares? And yeah, nobody cares. But reading these videos in the context of the rest of them was endlessly fun, and I could do it, and it turned out to be a complete meme. So that leaves me with one message left for this video. What Unraveled, or the rest of Brian's videos, mean in the grand scheme of things is what the videos mean to you. Whatever importance these videos have to you is the only valid reading. These videos are fantastically funny and pointless, but endlessly entertaining, so much so that I wrote an 8,000 word script just to get this point across, where I can say that I love these videos, and that I think they have done so much for so many people. And because of that, I encourage you to explore what these videos and what this person, this bureaucratic wunderkind, means to you.